Of this workshop is teaching like a champion with primary sources. Primary sources are immediate first-hand accounts of a topic from the people who had a direct connection with it, or lived it, or experienced it. Primary sources can include things like texts of laws or other government documents, newspapers by reporters who happened to witness it in person, or quoted people who were there, speeches, diaries, letters, interviews, the types of things that people wrote or said, or any original research, or things like data or maps or charts or graphs, census information or economic statistics or photographs or videos or any audio of an event that may have taken place. The key thing is that the people who created it were the ones who reported it. Secondary sources are one step removed from primary sources. So, for example, a secondary source would be a book about a topic where the book was written after the event actually occurred. The main difference is that they can cover the same topics, but that they add a layer of interpretation or analysis through the virtue of time that's taken place between the event and when the person is actually writing about it or discussing it. And things that are secondary sources can also include the analysis or interpretation of the data or any articles or books about a topic. And the key thing about this is that those books or the interpretation are taking place after the fact, and the people who were reporting it were not directly involved or were there. And documentaries are a great example of secondary sources. If you've seen documentaries that include photos or videos of the Civil War or something like that, or from the Revolutionary War in a history class, those are examples of secondary sources, although they may actually include primary sources in them. So the question comes, why use primary sources? Why should I use primary sources in my teaching? Well, working with primary sources builds a whole host of different student skill sets, from reading complex texts to assessing the credibility of a source to looking at things that actually happened as they happen. And it also builds students' ability to generate questions, to think like historians, to consider multiple perspectives other than their own, and to evaluate the actual event from the people who lived it, even if their perspectives are different. The thing about primary sources is that as far down as the second grade, the K-2 band in the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, those children still have to be exploring primary sources. And I've copied in a standard here, which says, and again, it's the kindergarten through second grade band. Students have to use primary sources that represent multiple perspectives to compare and make inference about why there are different accounts of the same event. And if we unpack this, there are some key terms involved in it. First of all, the students have to use primary sources. So they have to understand what they are. They then have to understand that those primary sources represent different perspectives. So people, in a sense, we're not just learning facts, but we're actually understanding that people have a point of view about an event, and that those points of view are okay. And they are then understanding that they're juxtaposing the points of view and understanding that there may be different ways of understanding the same event. Now, there are three main ways to teach like a champion with primary sources. The first main way is to use what are called analysis sheets. And there are 8 or 10 different analysis sheets here that I wanted to show you that are specifically designed to help young children understand primary sources. So, for example, if we look at one that is a photograph, for example, what this analysis sheet tries to do, and you'll notice that it can be printed out, it asks the children to do 3 different parts. The first one is to meet the photo and see what's there. The second part is to observe its different parts. And the third part of the analysis is to try to make sense of actually what's there. And you'll notice that there are dotted lines. And the dotted lines are excellent as far as being able to use small groups so that you can block off certain things for certain groups of kids. And the analysis sheet here, just like all of the others, is what's called inquiry-based. So that instead of you just explaining what's in the photograph, for example, you would ask the questions, or in this case, the sheet asks the questions, and the children in their small groups have to explore the photograph to answer them. And then they can take active notes about what they see, or at least discuss. And this is the beauty of the way that these sheets are created, because they're designed to be collaborative. And while they certainly can be completed by individual students, they're designed to be collaborative so that the students can look at these together and see different things together. And it asks the children again to understand, okay, is it black and white or is it color? Because the difference is that color came in later. And that tells us a little bit more about when this might have occurred. Is there a caption? And yes or no, and so forth. But the idea is that by understanding and getting to know the photo, and then observing the different parts, what's in this picture, what's happening, that by then they can start to make sense of the picture. And what's also important for you to understand is that different children and different groups are going to see different things in the photo. And it's just like looking at a piece of art, and that is that that's okay. Some people might like it, some people might not. Some people may disagree about who took the photo, or why the photo was taken, or where it was taken, and that's okay. Ultimately, if you're able to take a look at the photo and understand some of these things in advance, you can help guide the children towards some of the answers. But understandably, by the end, what we want to do is to try to use this photograph as evidence of something that happened in time. That somebody took this picture, for example, and the picture represents something, and what we then have to do is put all these different answers to these questions together and understand what it is that it tells us. How is it historical evidence? Why is this important? Why is it bother understanding and looking at this photograph to understand something from the past? So that's an example of how you can use these analysis sheets, and each one is different. If you see it for a different type of source, for example, I'll click on a map, and you'll notice that the same basic parts are there. Meet it, observe it, make sense of it, and use it as evidence. But in the end, the basic purpose is the same. And the worksheets are also translatable into Spanish, and all you have to do is click in here and you'll be able to see it in Spanish. Okay? So that's the first step. And I would suggest that you follow this progression, just like we discussed with the last slide. And I would suggest that you follow this framework each time for each source, that you observe it, that you try to make sense of it, and finally, that you use this source as a part of historical evidence for understanding the past. And hopefully, once the children become familiar with using the worksheets, once they do it a few times and you guide them, then they will become more acclimated to the steps and understand the various things that they have to do. And eventually, they will obviously understand and internalize the procedure and be able to go through those steps themselves every time that they encounter a primary source. And it's that internalization of the procedure that ultimately shows that they're learning, just like they understand how to line up or how to go to the bathroom or sharpen their pencil or what have you. I like to consider the view of Christopher Columbus, for example, as a way that we can see two different things for the same event. And Columbus is sort of a hot button topic right now, but let's take a look at the proclamation of 1966, created by then President Lyndon Johnson, which dedicated Columbus Day. And if you understand it and you read it a little bit, it goes on to say some interesting things. Primarily that there's something of Christopher Columbus in every American, and we're no longer facing hostility, but our adventure is not over. And if you read this, it really, really glorifies Columbus. And we need to honor Columbus as a voyager and as a symbol of the Enlightenment. And we have to honor him as an Italian, and so on, and all Italians who came after him. And it goes on this back page. And basically what it does is it recognizes our debt to Columbus. And therefore, because we have this debt to Columbus, we're dedicating this day. Okay? That's one view of Columbus. Now, another view of Columbus is one that we can get from Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a contemporary of Columbus, who was an explorer just like Columbus. And if you listen to this speech which was written by de las Casas, which is read aloud by a guy named John Sayles, it basically trashes Columbus. And it goes on to describe things that you wouldn't even necessarily want to include in an elementary classroom. Now, I say that not to hide the truth from the children, because the truth in some cases in history is an ugly truth. But the point that we have to have the children understand is that not everything in history is a fact, and not everything in history is wonderful. So if we look at someone like Columbus, and you take a minute and you listen to this account, you'll understand that Columbus and his other explorers and in his later journeys destroyed the people of Hispaniola. And they did some horrible things, including burning people alive, hanging people, and so forth. And it's very difficult to listen to. But the point I'm trying to make is that, and I'm using an extreme example here. Other primary sources may not do that in such an extreme way. But the point I'm trying to make with this is so that you can help the children understand that there may be different ways of perceiving the same event, or different ways of understanding the same period of time. And that's okay. That it's our job to teach them how to think, but it's not our job necessarily to teach them what to think. We're not necessarily here to convince them that Columbus Day is a great thing and we should recognize Columbus every year. And it's not necessarily our job to tell the children that Columbus is a horrible guy and instead we should recognize the Native Americans instead and totally eliminate Columbus from any celebration whatsoever. That is not our job. Our job is to lay out the historical evidence and the facts as we are able to gather them, and to allow the children to interpret them with their own minds. And by doing so, we are teaching the children how to think and how to interpret the evidence in their own minds, given their own evidence. And obviously that's where history allows you and other readers to explore more evidence, to get a bigger picture of the past. And again, so that our shift goes from not necessarily giving the children names and dates, but more questioning, more looking at the past with a critical eye and drawing our own conclusions. That concludes this presentation, and I hope this was helpful. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to give me a call or write me an email. Thank you.